Good evening. Good evening. Hi, everyone. My name is Vince Warren. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. I'm very happy to welcome you all to this wonderful evening called Palestine in Focus, a conversation with Raji Sourani, Shawan Jabarin, and Rashid Khalidi, moderated by Katherine Franke. Our hope is this evening that you will be able to get beyond what we know is a tremendous media machine that drives stories and narratives about what happens on the ground. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but what we want to do today is we want to get an understanding from the people who are actually doing the work, from the people who are the most oppressed, but I think the people that are also essentially doing the most to push back against the oppression, and in this case using legal means, using advocacy, and using other things. I want to thank the Bertha Foundation for their incredible support to CCR in allowing us to host Raji Sourani here from Gaza. It's not an easy trip, for those of you that know the region, from Gaza to anywhere, much less Gaza to New York, and so we're thrilled to have you with us, and we want to thank the Bertha Foundation for that. We also want to thank our partners and our co-sponsors of this event, which include the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, Al-Haq, Columbia University Center for Palestine Studies, FIDH Code Pink, Columbia Law School's Human Rights Institute, and the National Lawyers Guild. I want to introduce a brief introduction of the people that will be speaking with us tonight, and there is much that can be said about each of them. But for the benefit of the people who are watching on the live stream and who may not be as familiar as some of you, I want to introduce, starting from my far left, is Raji Sourani. Raji is the founder and director of the Palestinian Center for Human Rights in Gaza. This visit to the United States is his first in many years due to US visa restrictions and his inability to leave the besieged Gaza Strip. As a result of his work defending human rights, he's been imprisoned on 6 occasions, the longest period being 3 years, and was adopted by Amnesty International as a prisoner of conscience in 1988. He was awarded the Joint Laureate for the Robert F. Kennedy Memorial for Human Rights in 1991, and received the 2013 Livelihood Award, also known as the Alternative Nobel Prize. He is currently a member of the Executive Committee of the International Commission of Jurists, and has been a member of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, and is a former vice president of the International Federation for Human Rights, otherwise known as FIDH. Sitting to his right is Shawan Jabarin, and Shawan is the director of Al-Haq, the Palestinian human rights organization based in Ramallah, West Bank. Having been subjected to years of travel ban by the Israeli authorities, this is only Jabarin's second visit to the United States in more than a decade. In addition to directing the oldest Palestinian rights organization, he is vice president of FIDH, a member of the Human Rights Watch Middle East and North Africa Division Advisory Committee, and a commissioner with the International Commission of Jurists. He received the Reebok Human Rights Award in 1990 and was the first Palestinian to be recognized as a prisoner of conscience by Amnesty International. I'll go with Professor Khalidi first. Acclaimed historian Rashid Khalidi is the Edward Said Professor of Arab Studies in the Department of History at Columbia University. He has taught at the Lebanese University, the American University of Beirut, Georgetown, and the University of Chicago. He's the past president of the Middle East Studies Association. Beyond his academic work, he was also advisor to the Palestinian delegation at the 1991 pre-Oslo negotiations in Washington, D.C. He is the author of many books, including So in Crisis, American Dominance in the Cold War in the Middle East, and most recently, Brokers of Deceit, How the U.S. has Undermined Peace in the Middle East. And finally, last but certainly not least, is our moderator for the evening, Professor Katherine Franke, who is among the nation's leading scholars in the area of feminism, sexuality, and race. She's also the director of the Center for Gender and Sexuality Law. She was awarded a 2011 Guggenheim Fellowship And in addition to her scholarly writing on sexual harassment, gender and sexual rights and racial history, she's also on the executive committee of Columbia's Center for Palestine Studies and on the Academic Advisory Council for a Jewish Voice for Peace. She's the author of numerous books as well, including her recently published and well-received and provocative Wedlocked, The Perils of Marriage Equality. And I would be remiss if I did not note that she is the new leader of CCR as the chair of the Center for Constitutional Rights Board. In turning this over to Professor Franke, I would just want to say that the Center for Constitutional Rights recently hosted a delegation, a legal delegation to Palestine. It was my first trip to Palestine. I've been to many regions around the world, a lot of them with CCR. I went to South Africa to work with the landless people. I went to Haiti after 2010 to work on human rights issues after the earthquake. I've been to jails and prisons around this country. I've been to Ferguson. I have never in my life seen what people in Palestine have to deal with on a daily basis. Never in my life. And what my reflection on that is very much like how I thought about what was happening in Ferguson through the mainstream media, through that media machine, that I didn't know what was going on until I went to the ground and I spoke to people. Similarly, all of the information that we get about the situation in Israel and Palestine comes through the information machine. And we are deeply honored, and it's a wonderful opportunity to hear from people that are on the ground to find out what is actually happening. So with that, I'll turn it over to Katherine Franke.
Thank you, Vince, my partner in crime. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm a professional. My day job is as an educator, and my evening job is as a student. And we gather here today in so many respects to learn from our partners in Gaza and the West Bank and in Palestine about what's really happening to Palestinians and to the territory in which, the shrinking territory in which they live, and how their claims for sovereignty and for freedom and emancipation are going through the lens of law. Israel-Palestine and the issues that are at stake there are in so many ways overdetermined by law. There is so much law in that space. The Israelis pride themselves on the fact that their military and their means and methods of administering, if you will, the occupation are deeply legal in nature. And so often, the legal claims of Palestinians get crowded out in that space. And for these human rights heroes, really, to do the work that they do, not alone, but certainly in an exemplary way, is heroic for so many reasons, but particularly given the conditions under which they work. Now, as Vince mentioned, we get a distorted view here in the United States of the realities on the ground, the forms of violence that Palestinians and Israelis live with. But if one learned only from the US press, you would think that the only forms of violence and the only sort of threats to human dignity involved young men with knives attacking innocent Israelis. And while I don't endorse any kind of violence, with or without a knife, there is so much more going on in these territories that we need to learn about. And there is systematic under- and misreporting that we suffer from in the US. So we are here to learn, and we are here out of an act of solidarity with our partners in the West Bank and in Gaza. So I want to extend a particularly warm welcome to both of you. And of course, to my wonderful colleague, Rashid Khalidi, a different partner in other crimes of mine, of ours at Columbia. So just to get us all somewhat on a similar page, maybe not the same page, but a similar page, let me just note that since 2007, Gaza has been under an absolute blockade, a virtually totalizing closure by the Israelis. 1.8 million Palestinians live in Gaza in what many people describe as the largest open-air prison. They are locked in to this space, denied free access to their compatriots in the West Bank, to exit from Gaza into 48, into Israel, and denied exit to any other part of the world for that matter. 500,000 of those people amount to internally displaced people within Gaza as the result of destruction of homes by the Israelis, most recently during Operation Protective Edge, I say with very scary quotes around it. More than 220,000 Palestinian homes were destroyed during Operation Protective Edge, and in addition, 148 schools, 15 hospitals, and 45 primary health care facilities. The infrastructure of normal life, of human flourishing, has been systematically destroyed by Israeli bombing in Gaza. This denial of access to an operating economy, to having any kind of borders with Israel, for the Gazans, where normal trade and a normal economy could take place, of course, are impossible, and have resulted in exceedingly high levels of unemployment, particularly for young people, but not only. Outrageous levels of food and water insecurity, and a kind of corrosive aid dependency, because they don't have a way to support themselves, because the possibilities for doing so have been denied systematically. More than 90% of the water in Gaza is undrinkable. And the experts that study forms of human sustainability say that Gaza will be uninhabitable by 2020, maybe sooner. Yet we lock them in there. The Israelis lock them in there nevertheless. Notwithstanding the bombing of homes, of hospitals, of schools, of healthcare centers, and of other parts of the infrastructure of Gazan life, basic construction materials, as many of you know, are denied entry into Gaza to do the rebuilding that is necessary as a result of the massive destruction that the Israelis have rained upon the Gazans, because on the theory that security renders cement, spare parts, computers, vehicles, dual-use purpose items that can become instruments of war by Gazans, and therefore they're not entitled to them in the least. Exit, as I said, from Gaza is impossible. In many, many cases, Israelis routinely deny exit permits for people for medical reasons, and it's taken 14 months of efforts to get Raji here. We had hoped to have him with us months and months ago, and we kept rescheduling these events because it was so difficult to get him a permit from the Israelis and then a visa from the United States. So it is an absolute, I want to say miracle, but act of will of many, many people that he is with us today. But that's just Gaza. The West Bank increasingly is enduring, people in the West Bank are increasingly enduring what I might call the Gaza-ification of the West Bank. It's becoming more and more like the dire situation of Gaza. Increasing restrictions through both permanent, temporary moving checkpoints make transportation extremely difficult for people living in the West Bank, even more so in some circumstances in East Jerusalem, where whole neighborhoods are now cordoned off, and mobility to work, to see family, to gain health care, to pray, to social and economic life is rendered almost impossible. Increasing food and water security is characterizing life in the West Bank as well. And as we all know, overwhelming aid dependency characterizes the lack of a vital independent economy in the West Bank, due largely, or due entirely to the violence of the occupation. So apart from the illegality of the occupation, the illegality of the settlements, the illegality of the wall, all of which the international community, with the exception of Israel and the United States in some cases, clearly violate international law, the Israelis continue forms of collective punishment of Palestinians living in the West Bank, certainly, and Gaza itself is a massive situation of collective punishment as well. But in the West Bank, we witness increasing numbers of home demolitions, excessive force, beyond the excessive force that had become the norm in past years by Israeli security forces, implementing a shoot-to-kill policy. Just 2 years ago, or a year ago, the Israelis changed their regulations in order to use live ammunition in East Jerusalem. Indefinite administrative detention is more a part of normal life than an exception to normal life. And raids of universities, NGOs, media offices, and the most robust parts of civil society are a normal course of affairs, where files are burned, computers are broken, and these very important parts of civil society life in the West Bank are destroyed on a regular basis, such that they have to rebuild themselves over and again. So just as the West Bank becomes more like Gaza, the United States is becoming more like Israel. The original 10-year agreement guaranteeing U.S. aid to Israel at $3.5 billion a year expires in 2017 and is being renegotiated between the Israeli government and the Obama administration now, and it's expected to raise to between $4 and $5 billion a year. This is part of how we're paying off the Israelis for how upset they are for our having pushed through the Iran nuclear deal. So we exchanged that deal for more military aid to the Israelis. If you haven't seen it already, the Center for Constitutional Rights and Palestine Legal, which is a wonderful legal organization that works on defending the rights of those who work in NGOs and universities, et cetera, and do solidarity work on Palestinian issues, and who are retaliated and harassed, retaliated against and harassed as a result. They've issued this amazing report documenting those forms of harassment, and I can commend it to all of you.
It's on the tables in the back.
It's on the tables in the back. There it is. Pick one out. That's great. No, I know the CCR staff doesn't want to take them home. But so much of the repression of Palestinian advocacy and solidarity in the domestic context is taking forms of state-sponsored censorship that are familiar in Israel itself. So here we're increasingly see the conflation of anti-Zionism or even critiques of liberal Zionism as a form of anti-Semitism. The University of California just last week renewed their principles on intolerance. In the original draft, conflated any critique of Zionism with anti-Semitism. After advocacy by a number of important people, including the CCR and Palestine Legal and academics in the UC system, they changed the principles to say that the university condemned anti-Semitic forms of anti-Zionism, whatever that might mean. But its very vagueness invites the chilling of speech. Never mind collapsing a critique of a political formation with the hatred of the people. In response to the successes of the BDS movement here, which Americans and others around the world are responding to, based on the request of civil society organizations within Palestine itself, bills across the country are being introduced and passed that would make it illegal to boycott an ally. In New York State, there is a bill pending in Albany that's already made it through one house of the state legislature that would disqualify any institution that has endorsed the boycott of an ally from receiving public funding. So you can't apply for public grants or public programs, funding for public programs. The Presbyterian Church would be included. An organization that endorsed the boycott of Turkey for how it's treating Syrian refugees would be included. But not only that, not only does it prohibit the funding of any organization that has supported a boycott of an ally, the bill requires the state to maintain a blacklist of all said institutions and publish it publicly. Blacklists have a very bad odor to them. And in the past have been used as ways to oppress Jews in this country, as well as, if any of us have seen Trumbo would know well. So we're seeing the increasing Israelification of the way the laws and the state respond to Palestinian solidarity domestically in ways that should trouble us all. So please join me in welcoming our three panelists and hearing first from Raji about his work in Gaza, and then we'll move through having somewhat brief remarks from each of the three of them, And then we may have some pointed questions from me at them to draw them out a bit more, and then we will absolutely welcome your questions and comments. My first thing I will ask you, though, is please turn your phones off or your ringers off. We would greatly appreciate that. So thank you. Considering it's your
22 years ago, Oslo Accords were signed, and everybody thought in the world that peace will be there. Oslo Accords intended to be A and B, confidence-building measure between the two parties, and concluding a Palestinian state on May 4, 1999. Soon after Oslo Accords, late Rabin was assassinated, definitely not by a Palestinian, and afterwards, President Arafat was killed as well, and definitely not by Palestinians.
Could you please speak it?
Yeah.
Oh, better.
And what we are having right now, something unique, special, unprecedented. To that extent, we remember the nice old days of this Israeli belligerent occupation before Oslo Accords. What is the situation right now in Gaza? What we are having in Gaza, complete siege, unprecedented one, no movement for goods or individuals, not with the outside world only, but as well with the other part of our nation, the West Bank and East Jerusalem. No connection whatsoever by any meaning, any level. This suffocated the life completely, socially, economically, and otherwise, and made life rather mission impossible. So, according to that, we have 65% unpaid or unemployed, 90% under poverty line, and 85% of the population depend totally on their food and rations from UNRWA and World Food Program, other charities. No electricity. We cannot fix our sewage, which was bombed by the Israelis. We cannot treat our water. That's dangerous. Israel in clear-cut way says, we will send you to the Middle Ages. 2 million people should be held accountable and punished. Why is that? Because Hamas in 2006, 25th of January, won the elections, and they were there. In one of the most fantastic demonstrations of democracy under occupation Palestinians practiced, and as President Carter said that day, you should be very proud of what you achieved. I didn't believe my eyes. This can happen in Gaza, this can happen in the occupied territories. You made it. Israel didn't satisfy with that at all. In 6 years, 3 wars has been launched, 2008-9, 12, and 2014. In 2014, 51 days. No single Gazan of the 2 million thought the next morning will come, he or she would be alive, including myself. None of us thought the next morning would come and we are alive. F-16s, Apache, drones, gunboats, artillery, tanks, land-to-land rockets were used 24 hours a day, non-stop. In areas like Beit Hanun or Shijaiya, Zanna area in Khan Yunis, entire areas has been erased. I didn't see the Nakba, but I saw it on July 21st, when more than 140,000 left Shijaiya area, one of the oldest areas of Gaza, 8 centuries old. After bombing for days and weeks, bombs with 985 kilos and 2-ton bombs on the head of the civilian people. They left only in their hand nothing except young or elderly or sick. Dahya doctrine has been practiced. Hannibal doctrine has been practiced as well. That was a big shame. They didn't leave hospitals without bombing them. Shelters for 570,000 people who tend to be homeless. Their houses has been destroyed either partially or completely. And they bombed the schools of UNRWA where has been allocated. In each bombing, tens of women, children, elderly has been killed. It's not only shelters, 89 families, 31 members, 29, 22, 27, 17, 12, Siddaya family, Najjar family, Batish family, people we know, erased from the civil registration. They don't exist anymore. Targeting the entire houses and erasing entire families with no mercy. You feel you are just paralyzed. You feel you stripped from your dignity, you are bare, anything. Even the only power station in Gaza, electricity, has been bombed. Our sewage system has been bombed, and accordingly the entire Gaza sewage goes to our little sea to be completely and absolutely polluted. %90 of the factories in Gaza in the last days of the offensive has been destroyed. Farms erased, even chicken farms, even strawberry farms were not exception on that. And then the word suggests we have to rebuild Gaza, and we have to put a mechanism for that, and much worse, we will create mechanism, and it has been called Robert Serry mechanism to rebuild Gaza. It's not us. OCHA says and suggests if this will be built according to this plan, it will take 20 years at least to rebuild what three wars caused to Gaza. This is a shame, definitely for Israel, much worse for those who legitimized and supported this criminal war in which civilians were in the eye of the storm. Now, we documented legally all these war crimes, and we filed to the MAG, Military Attorney General in Israel, within the 60 days period required by law, these complaints. And none of these cases has been taken seriously for simple reason. The Military Attorney General, before and after the war, he said, we look to the entire basket of targets that the Israeli army going to hit. And this was agreed by our legal advisors. It's not a big shame for Attorney General to say that, but also for the Israeli legal system, who provide full legal cover for organized systematic crimes committed against Palestinian civilians. We have to be good victims. We have to die in silence. I think resistance, it's our right and our obligation. And I think everybody should remember that there is something called the right of self-determination. It's not others who decide for you. You decide by yourself. We cannot look to the eyes of our wives and children while they are killed in total, inhuman, unmerciful way by criminal gangsters called themselves state. Maybe Gazans deserve that. We deserve our children not to be treated. Maybe we deserve our mothers, fathers, dies in front of our eyes and we can do nothing for them to bring them develop medical care. Maybe we have to live without electricity in the 21st century. Maybe because we are having Hamas, we deserve all that. But I want to remind everybody, the problem it's not Gaza. What's going on in Jerusalem? In simple words, ethnic cleansing for Palestinians, Christians, and Muslims, and Judaization for the entire city, and the city entirely enclaved with a chain of settlements, and nothing left really to be negotiated about Jerusalem. In the West Bank, situation much worse. Settlements, expansion, vertically, horizontally, new settlements are built every day. More and more settlers poured to the West Bank. Bypass roads connecting these settlements with Israel only allowed for Jews. Incursions for cities, villages, camps, killing, destroying, arresting. That's day-to-day normal behavior. Grabbing more and more land every day. Hundreds of checkpoints all over the West Bank, making Mission impossible moving between them. Most of the Palestinian Legislative Council members in administrative detention, no charges, nothing. Torture very systematic in the Israeli prisons. So what we are having in the West Bank really, a new brand of apartheid. As our counterparts in South Africa says, this is unprecedented. They never witnessed under the South African apartheid regime anything as such. And that's true. We don't want too much. What we want, rule of law. We want international law, international humanitarian law, and the human rights for Palestinians. When we say we want to effectively use universal jurisdiction, filing cases against Israeli war criminals, and we use courts and law in the civilized Europe, Madrid, London, Bern, Brussels, and we won the cases. Politicians come up and apologize. And they say sorry to Israel, and they promise to change the law a few months after they do change the laws. This is Europe. This is not Ouagadougou. Shame on them. Big shame. Nobody remembers what had happened pre the Holocaust. And they don't want to remember because we are Palestinians. When you indulge rule of jungle, you will pay for it. We are paying already, but many others will pay for that as well. And that's what's happening right now. What message we can bring as human rights defenders? They want us to give up. They want us to be frustrated. They want us to lose hope. They want us to think there is no tomorrow. We are on the right side of history. We know we defending just fair, right cause. And nobody on earth can take from our hearts and minds our strategic optimism. We are the stones of the valley. We have been there ever, and we will continue there forever. We are strong enough. We are resilient. We have no right to be good victims, and we have no right to give up. We'll continue with our struggle. With support of free, committed people across the globe, definitely we are much more stronger. Thank you.
It's difficult to speak after Raji, you know. It's a great honor to be with you tonight. And I would like to start by encouraging you all to go to Palestine, to see, to visit, to go as a field tour on the ground to see the situation there and to take a direct impression about the situation. I promise we are ready to take care of any visitors of you. And really I encourage you that even with all of the things that you hear from Raji and you will hear from me, it will be like 1% of the reality on the ground and what's going on in the ground. That's the case. I will not go in details. and I will not go in academic dimension to discuss the legality and what it means and to analyze all of these things legally. But I'm asking myself a practical question. What the Israeli want to gain from all of these policies and practices? What they gain from not allowing a mom to join her daughter or son in a hospital in Jerusalem, and she or he died in Jerusalem without saying goodbye to him or to her? I'm not exaggerating. These stories, it's part of a daily life, because they isolate completely and cut off completely Jerusalem from the rest of West Bank. And they don't give even for those they apply for permits, they call them permits. And the permit system, it's a controlling system. There is a politics behind. There is no security behind. Why they don't allow 80 years old woman to go to visit her son in a prison inside Israel for security reasons? What's the security reasons for old women to go to say hi to her son? What they gain from going and making a deal with sick people in cancer, from Gaza, in the checkpoint called Ares, trying to make a deal with a sick person to become a collaborator. Or they will not give him or her the chance to go to the hospital to take the treatment. I'm not speaking about stories happening on the moon. No, we documented these cases. And we have been documenting all of these cases since so long. It's part of a systematic and continuing official policy. It's not just a crazy soldier here or officer there doing that against the people. No, this is part of a policy, official policy, which is called siege, cut off, isolation, exclusion, and give names like security. For security reasons, you have to follow this procedure. I ask myself what they gain from demolishing houses after they killed, for instance, a son of the family. He died, they killed him, her, they don't send back the body to bury the body, keep the body months, days, weeks, and go and deal with the family. Like, for instance, if you want to bury the body, you have to bury it after midnight. You have not to do an autopsy for the body to know how they killed him or her. This is an issue, And if you breach this deal or this conditions, you pay $600 or $6,500. What's this? Weeks after, they come to the house and they demolish the house and they send the rest of the family to the street as a homeless. If you are homeless, they kill your son, they demolish your house, and they left nothing for you, and you have nothing to lose. Is it a threat of the security or not? I ask myself, I have been asking myself all of these questions before I address these questions to anyone else. And I found the logic behind all of these things is politics, and there is a policy, a long-term policy, long-term plan. And the long-term plan is they want no Palestinians in this area. They want to take over everything, and to let Palestinians get out of their country. That's the only logic. Because if I put myself and think like a military person, security person, something like that, I will say it's completely against security. It's completely what they do. If you leave nothing to the people, they are ready to commit anything. And this is against the security completely. This is what's going on now in Palestine, and it's not new. No, it's not new. When you come to the United States and study at Columbia University and go back to your family in Palestine, and you want to come again, just to join your school, and they don't give you a permit, or they stop you on the bridge and send you back, and they kill your future. That's the travel ban is a policy. Also, they imposed over Palestinians there. What they can gain from that. If I am a security threat, I will be threat there, not in the US. But they want to gain one thing, is to go and deal with me, to get out of the country and to stay there for 4 years, 5 years, 3 years, continuously. What's the logic behind that? The logic behind it, they want me to go and to establish my life center outside of Palestine. Because if I go every year, I have a connection with my family, with my land. There is a long-term plan. That's the case. We have to look at everything happening in Palestine, systematic, a plan, part of official policy. There is, politics behind that. Because of that, if they are serious, in which they called peace process, peace, something like that, why they build more settlements and they expand settlements and confiscate more lands and isolate Palestinians and excluding them, and now the Palestinian cities, villages, towns became like enclaves surrounded by bypass roads connecting between different settlements and things like that. This is the case in Palestine. Why they want to damage completely the unity between Palestinians? They are targeting family unity. You will find there thousands, tens of thousands of families separated. Part of them in Jordan, other part in West Bank or in Gaza. Part of them in Jerusalem, and the other part in Ramallah or elsewhere, other cities in West Bank. This is an issue. I think they are targeting the structure of the society. This is the case. They don't want us to stay in this area. I'm not exaggerating, because when I look and put everything together and look at the policy behind, just you can imagine 9,500 settlers in Jordan Valley. They are enjoying exactly the same amount of 2.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank. Water, I'm speaking about water here. 9,500. And many of Palestinians in different villages, different communities in the West Bank, they have no running water and they have no water networks because they don't allow them to do that. They call it Area C. That's the case. And they don't allow even the main pipes, the network, to go through specific areas or specific roads or something like that. But at the same time, the settlers, they enjoy the swimming pools. They have swimming pools. This is the case in Palestine. I don't know what you call it. And you have two different legal systems there. One for the Palestinians, which is called military order, military courts, and for the settlers, on Palestinians I mean military, but for the others, civil courts, civil law, Israeli law, things like that. They used to deal with the children. They identify the Israeli children under 18, Palestinian children under 16. What's this difference between children? It's a blood, difference of a blood. What exactly? Child is child. Why? What do you call this? I don't know. I will leave that for you. But I'm trying just to address what's going on, reality on the ground. Call it what you want. Apartheid, not apartheid. This is what's going on the ground. According law, international humanitarian law, Palestinians, they are protected persons under Geneva Convention. And they have to be protected. And they have to enjoy also, the natural resources in their country. The Israelis taking everything. They are taking the water for their use, for their benefits, taking land, taking even the magnetic space. They refuse to give us 3G. They are enjoying 4G. Yeah. They refused until today to give us 3G, and I hear that Tony Blair and others, I think they were success lately, I think a few weeks ago, to push them to accept 3G for Palestinians, just to use 3G system, to use a mobile and things like that. I am the Palestinians in the West Bank. I can go and buy an Israeli SIM card and I can enjoy 4G. There is no security behind. There's something else behind. Economy behind. That's an issue. They try to keep us just behind. This is the case. I think this is the story. And they want to benefit from every aspects in our land, in our life, and all of these things. I brought this, and I'm bringing this as just small examples here and there. I'm speaking about documented cases. Go to Al-Haq, for instance, go to the PCHR website and download all of these things. Go to the Israeli Human Rights Organization's website and download all of these things. The case about the sick people, for instance, and dealing to, push them to become collaborators. Go to the Israeli organization called Physicians for Human Rights in Tel Aviv and download that from their website. This is the case. This is the cheapest. Or, I think, this is the richest occupation in history. They are taking everything and not paying anything. That's the case. They are committing all forms of crimes, international crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and no one holding them accountable for their crimes. Because of that, they repeat it. If the criminal, even the ordinary criminal, if he or she doesn't pay the price and holding accountable, they will repeat their crimes again and again and again. And the states is the same. That's the case. If they hold them accountable, they will rethink and reevaluate their policies and their practices. That's the reason why things continue there. Maybe we are Palestinians exaggerating about all of these things. What I'm saying, just less than 1% of the reality on the ground. We have a lot of stories, a lot of, information about policies, but I would like, because I think that my time flies, I would like to address a few things. One, everything happened, and the people watching what's going on, and everyone watching what's going on there, and closing their eyes. And they don't act according to their legal obligation. And more than that, they are encouraging them to do that. When they support them financially, militarily, politically, and they block any work before the United Nations and before the Security Council, this is also an encouragement. This is a complicit in the crime taking place in Palestine. I'm here speaking about the United States. When we come here, for instance, and speak to diplomats, all of them, west, east, south, north, all of them, they said, the Americans, they will use a veto. We can't do anything. This is the case. I would like to ask the Americans, I mean the officials, to look at what's going on and characterize it, and to make a judgment, ethical judgment, legal judgment, a human judgment about what's going on there. They close their eyes, they are blind, and more than that, they support the crimes. They are part of the crime. They are part of the responsibility of the crime. I don't want to go in details of that. I say Israel has to pay the price for their crimes, for its crimes. If not, I think no way will change on the ground. Another thing is what concerns me as a human rights activist, as Palestinian, is the new generation. When I look at the new generation and I see the frustration and I see that they lost their hope and today just they take a knife, this is a way, their own way to protect, to do, to resist, let me say, to express their opinion. That's concerned me a lot when I see that. And there is no hope. As a human rights organizations, activists, we try to maintain a hope by saying to them, look, the ICC, other mechanisms, as what Raji mentioned, will bring you some hope. They gave us a chance. But for instance, when everything is blocked before them, they come to us and ask, what's this international law means for us? If we don't enjoy the principles, the values, the protections, what this means for us? We don't want them to lose their hope with the peaceful ways. If the international community doesn't want us to use law, international law, to use courts, to use, BDS or peaceful ways, what they want us to use, exactly, what they want us to use. This is a question I ask myself. Questions like that, I address that to myself first. I don't want to reach, the other side of the answer, but I can say, we keep hope. We will not surrender. I do believe strongly, with a deep faith, that the future is for justice, the future is for human rights, but the painful that I have is why we have to pay this high price until we reach that moment. Another lesson I learned, no one can stay as a superpower forever. And if you build your presence, if you build your society on one main element called force, this is a changeable things in history. We don't want history to repeat itself in Palestine. When we come here to address civil society, officials, everyone, we want them to help us to get out of this catastrophe, because we don't want history to repeat itself. It started with the Wabsha family when they burned a family, and we don't want them to burn more Palestinians. We don't want them also to burn Jews in Palestine. That's the case. Because of that, we don't want a history to repeat itself. This is, the simple message we have. A simple message we have also is to respect international law that you invented, you ratified, you signed, you speak about it. Why? Why it's just theoretical things in the boxes here and there, and it's forbidden for Palestinians to use it and to enjoy all of these values? That's the case. I will stop until here, and I will leave, the floor for Professor Khalidi, and after that, questions. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Let me turn on my mic. There we go. Better?
Yeah.
Well, let me thank CCR for organizing this evening's event. Anytime we have a chance to listen to people who can bring us testimonies from Palestine, I think we're very, very fortunate. Every single thing that you have heard about from Raji and from Shawan and from Katherine before them, every single violation of human rights, every single abuse, every single detail is made possible by the support of the United States. Would not be possible without the support of the United States. Almost every weapon Raji described, Apache helicopters, F-16s, 2,000-pound bombs, almost every single weapon used against Gaza is an American weapon. Those are sold according to a 1976 law for purposes of self-defense. So children incinerated in Gaza were incinerated in violation of US law, in gross, blatant violation of US law, in a way which our political class is simply allowing to continue. We know that Israeli actions are underwritten financially by the United States. Katherine mentioned the sums. They're going to increase, apparently, to over $4 billion a year, almost all in military aid, to the strongest power in the entire third world, Israel, a country that dominates the entire Middle East, has a reach that no Middle Eastern country has in terms of its ability to bomb other countries. Israel has bombed 6 Arab capitals. It's bombed Cairo, it's bombed Tunis, it's bombed Beirut, it's bombed Amman, it's bombed Baghdad, it's bombed Damascus. It is a country with enormous reach and power, and we arm it for next year, according to the news reports, as much as $4 billion annually will start flowing. $3 billion, $3.2 billion has been flowing annually for many, many years. That's not the only support that's given to Israel. You may know, because it's April, that we, most of us, pay a lot of taxes. You may or may not know that the Israeli army, the IDF, Israeli settlements in the occupied territories, and various other endeavors which involve violations of international law, abuses of Palestinian human rights, are supported by 501c3s, which enable the donors to get a tax deduction. So we are paying taxes, so other people don't pay taxes, so that settlements can be expanded, and so the IDF can have the creature comforts that enable it to carry out the kind of abuses that Shawan and Raji were talking about, at checkpoints, or from F-16s, or Apache helicopters, or drones. There are many other forms of this support. But this support is something that should give every one of us who hears the absurd argument, why is poor Israel being singled out for criticism when there are so many other abusers of human rights? I heard that at a forum that you moderated yesterday from a student in the back row. And she went on, talking about Syria and Russia and China. Why are people always criticizing, she didn't say poor little Israel, but that was implicit. Well, Syria is a serial abuser of human rights. Russia is a serial abuser of human rights. They are not recipients of billions of dollars of our tax dollars. They do not have an American veto machine in the Security Council to prevent anybody from bringing Israel to book. They do not have, in other words, the blank check that administration after administration after administration has written for every abuse that Israel carries out of Palestinian human rights. That means that this is our responsibility as citizens. We are not responsible for what Russia does. We are not responsible for what China does. We are responsible, however, for what allies using American weapons do. So if Saudi Arabia bombs Yemen, yes, we are responsible. If Turkey bombs Kurdish areas of southeastern Anatolia, yes, we are responsible. And those are things that we should, as citizens, be raising our voices against. But this is an absolutely legitimate critique that anybody can make of Israel or any other U.S. ally using U.S. weapons or receiving U.S. aid in order to carry out systematic and massive violations of human rights. Let me mention one other violator, which is the Palestinian Authority. Neither of our speakers had time to mention this, but supported by the United States, supported by Europe, supported by a variety of other American allies, a regime has been established in the West Bank, which basically supports the occupation, enables the occupation, and is a collaborator with the occupation. This is a regime which is a serial violator of Palestinian human rights as well. It is sad to say a Palestinian regime, but it is a regime that also should be open to the same kind of criticism by U.S. citizens because of our country's role in establishing this regime. It was established as part of the so-called peace process, which has been underway under U.S. patronage since the 1970s, since Camp David, and really took off in its present form with the 1991 Madrid Peace Conference, the negotiations in Washington, and most importantly, the secret Oslo negotiations, which led to the Oslo Accords. This regime was established under U.S.-Israeli patronage. It is a client regime of Israel and the United States. It is not an independent Palestinian regime. It exists for the purpose of supporting and maintaining and helping the occupation. Palestinians entered into it, thinking and hoping, as Raji mentioned, that this would lead to Palestinian statehood. This is a process that has been going on, depending on how you want to count it, since 1978, or 1991, or 1993. In that period, the situation of Palestinians has grown measurably worse. When I lived in Jerusalem in 1990 and 91, any Palestinian from anywhere in Palestine, except a very small subset of people, could travel anywhere in mandatory Palestine. You could take a car from the West Bank with West Bank plates and drive to Gaza. Nobody would stop you. You could take a car and go to Eilat. You could take a car and go to the occupied Golan Heights. Nobody would stop you. You could get a car in Gaza and do the same thing. You heard today from our two speakers what the situation is. The situation of Palestinians has not been a situation which can be described correctly in anything but Orwellian language as the result of a peace process. It has been a process which has entrenched occupation and entrenched the colonization of occupied Palestine. That is what the United States has contributed to since Camp David in '78 and since Oslo in 1993. That is what the handshake on the White House lawn, whatever was intended, has actually led to. When we went to Madrid in the fall of 1991, there were 200,000 Israeli settlers in the occupied territories, all of the occupied territories, including East Jerusalem. There are 600,000 plus today. The number of settlers has tripled in consequence of and during a so-called peace process. Now, I could go on and enumerate all that the United States does to uphold this unjust and oppressive status quo. I'm not going to do that. What I want to talk about, and what is left to me in terms of time, is to suggest some of the reasons why the United States is so deeply involved in supporting and upholding this status quo of the unending colonization of Palestinian land and the unending oppression of Palestinians. There are multiple reasons why the United States is doing this. The first set of these reasons have to do with strategic concerns, with shared strategic interests between the American imperial project in the Middle East and between Israel's project. Neither the United States nor Israel, since the 1950s, since the Egyptian Revolution of 1952, neither Israel or the United States, has seen it in its interest to have strong, democratic, stable, and fully independent states in this region. The United States destroyed, together with Britain, the elected democratic government of Iran in 1953 because it challenged American economic and British economic interests. And the United States and Israel have worked ever since the 50s to ensure that you have regimes that take their lead from Washington, that do what our policymakers want. That is their objective, and it's an objective that's, of course, congenial to Israel's governments. Now, the United States and Israel have differences, but this is an issue they have seen eye to eye on for well over half a century. And you can see how much of a problem strong and independent states in the Middle East, whether they're democratic or not, can cause for American policymakers. Look at Turkey, look at Iran, very different kinds of countries, one a rival of the United States, one an ally of the United States. These are countries that don't necessarily do what Washington wants. Iran never does, and Turkey rarely does, nor does Israel, for that matter, do what the United States wants. These are strong, independent countries. The United States does not want this in the Arab world, nor does Israel. So this is a shared strategic interest between these two countries. Israel serves as a policeman, a local policeman. The United States, unfortunately, since the first Gulf War, and even more tragically, since the 2000 invasion of Iraq, has been its own policeman. And we've seen the obscene, tragic consequences of that direct involvement of the United States. But in other regions, in other spheres, Israel serves as a local policeman. There's a second interest that the United States has. And this is a vital interest also. And this is an economic interest, which is to keep in power the undemocratic, unrepresentative kleptocracies which rule the countries of the Arab Gulf. The thieving royal families which arrogate to themselves absolute, untrammeled, undemocratic political power, but which are not there only, or not kept in power, I should say, only or mainly because they're undemocratic, unrepresentative autocrats. It is mainly because these people will do most of the time what the United States wants. And very, very importantly, they will direct their investments, they will direct their purchases to the United States. So that instead of the money going to their own peoples, or the peoples of the region, instead of it being invested in human development in the entire Middle East, it's invested in the towers you see on 57th Street, the 30 and 40 and 60 floor buildings with 5 and 10 and 30 and $50 million apartments. There are obviously many other investors, Russian, Chinese, Brazilian, and so on, but in London, in Paris, in New York, in that real estate market, as you can imagine, people from the Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia are prominent. They're also prominent in even more important areas than real estate. Areas like oil, areas like aerospace. Where do Boeing and Airbus sell a huge proportion of their planes? In the Gulf. They sell them in other markets, of course, but the Gulf is crucial. Where does General Dynamics, where does Raytheon, where do the manufacturers of the Apaches and the F-16s sell their planes? Well, they sell some of them to Israel, but they sell a lot of them to the Gulf. The numbers are mind-boggling for arms purchases from these regimes, which cannot defend themselves. These are purchased as insurance, not as weapons. These are countries which are basically incapable of defending themselves. They exist on sufferance. I rarely agree with Republican presidential candidates, but one of them said something which is true, which is these are countries that entirely depend on the United States to defend their autocratic, undemocratic kleptocracies. They literally cannot defend themselves. In questions, I can talk about to what extent this is true. What they're doing is buying support. So they don't need a lobby. People talk about the Israel lobby. I'll talk about it in a minute. They don't need a lobby. They have the entire arms industry, the entire aerospace industry, the entire oil industry, a large chunk of the banking industry, and the whole real estate industry. They don't need a lobby. The people who own our country basically serve as a lobby for these kleptocrats in the Gulf. And what's the link with Israel? Well, these countries have been completely passive on the issue of Palestine. They have done not one thing. They have lifted not one finger in support of the Palestinians from 1948 until today. Go through foreign relations of the United States. Go through the documents which are published by our State Department, and you will see the American Secretary of State, George Marshall, fulsomely thanking Ibn Saud for his support over Palestine, for not making trouble in 1948 over Palestine. That blank check given by those regimes is the link, if you want, the missing link between the United States and the Gulf, and between the United States and Israel. There is no hostility between these countries and Israel. Their alliance over Iran is new, or their quasi-alliance over Iran is new. The purchase by the Emirates of weaponry developed and manufactured in Israel is new. But the level of collaboration and complicity between them goes back decades and decades and decades to 1948, in fact. Now, the second set of reasons. So the first set of reasons for this American support for Israel is strategic and economic. The second set of reasons for the United States to support Israel has to do with discursive and political factors here in the United States. Simply put, the only narrative that most Americans and most of the American political class have ever had access to about Palestine is one that is hostile to the Palestinians and that has been put together by people who wish the Palestinians ill. This is something that's been going on for generations. In fact, it goes back to 1948, and in some senses, even before. In other words, most of what most Americans think they know about Palestine is wrong. It's not only wrong, it was in fact produced by people who, are trying to put forward a completely different narrative, and who have succeeded, in fact, in winning over the mainstream media and most of the American political class. Now, I could give you examples of this narrative. I could quote things, making the desert bloom, the Palestinians are terrorists. I could go on and on. These things are, I'm sure, familiar to you. We all hear them daily from the media. We all hear them daily from our politicians. I don't need to repeat them to you. This discursive arsenal, this arsenal of words that are mendacious and that completely distort the kinds of realities that we just heard about. Do you know how many people have been killed in Palestine in the last several months? A very small number of Israelis, in the dozens, and a couple of hundred Palestinians. And if you listen to the Israeli account, many of them were killed while trying to carry out attacks. But you can't carry out autopsies to find out how they actually were killed. And in fact, many of them, even by the Israeli account, were simply demonstrators shot down by snipers. Demonstrators. Not people carrying knives. Demonstrators. More demonstrators were killed by Israeli security forces while demonstrating than Israelis killed by knife-wielding Palestinians. We don't get that in our media. We never get those numbers. We never get that a couple of dozen Israelis were killed in the Gaza war, as well as 1,400 Palestinians. The overwhelming majority of whom were women and children, and old people and sick people. We just don't get those facts. We never get that. We get a balanced view of Israelis cowering in a shelter under a rocket attack, and a long-distance picture of something happening in Gaza, some flames or bombs or whatever. But we don't get those kinds of numbers. The almost 10,000 people killed and wounded in Gaza, as against 100 or so Israelis killed and wounded. We just don't get that. We don't get that balance. What we get is a faux balance, a fake balance. All of this discursive arsenal is backed up by political and financial muscle, wielded by a lobby, which is in the unique position of wielding this power, and then of intimidating those who point out that they have this power by smearing them as anti-Semitic. If you say, there is a lobby which exercises influence on Capitol Hill, you're either a self-hating Jew or you're an anti-Semite. I mean, it's a self-evident fact. These people write the legislation. AIPAC screwed up once. They actually faxed the legislation that they told American legislators to put through and left the AIPAC fax number and name at the top of the legislation. And the imbecilic legislator, he or she, I don't know who it was, actually put this forth. And people said, oh, you might take AIPAC off the top. They wrote the bill for you. But, at least have the decency not to make it clear that you're just jumping up and down when they push a button. And when you talk about that, you're described as being anti-Semitic or a self-hating Jew. So it's a unique lobby. This is something that is used against supporters of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, in particular, with particular force these days. It's used to, I should shut down in 2 minutes. Okay, let me really quickly conclude. And it's used in particular these days on campuses, and I commend you to look at the Palestine legal materials which talk about that. I mention campuses because it is there that this situation is beginning to change. It's beginning to change thanks to groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, Students for Justice in Palestine, the campaign around boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and many other grassroots organizations. They have opened up a political debate on campus for the first time in history to include a Palestinian perspective. Imagine that. You don't just have the standard mainstream view of faux view, mendacious view of reality. This, of course, has scared the custodians of the pro-occupation and pro-colonization status quo in Palestine, and they have mobilized massive resources to counter and repress this grassroots mainly student organized effort. What are the students trying to do? They're simply trying to expose other students to views that are different from the standard false perspective that most people face insofar as the Middle East is concerned. And they're able to do this because kids don't consume mainstream media. They know it's a pack of lies. They do not look at CNN. And if they look at the New York Times, it's just by coincidence. They have their own access. They will read stuff from the region. They will read alternative, and they will only read that. And so they know more of what these two gentlemen were talking about than most of us who consume the mainstream media. They have means of access to facts that most older Americans don't have. And that's why this campaign is working on campus. There are signs that this has begun to impact the political process. I won't go into the signs. Some of you have seen or heard them. Senator Leahy putting forward a critique. Bernie Sanders giving a speech. Let me warn you against wild-eyed optimism. These are signs of change. These are straws in the wind. They are nothing more. The interests that I talked about are still in place, strategic and economic. They're very powerful. The discursive iron curtain of lies and distortions is still in place. The mainstream media produces a completely false narrative most of the time. That's beginning to change, but only beginning. And the political class is endlessly corrupt. And there is an enormous shift that's taken place in the American political spectrum, in that the Republican Party now has a powerful evangelical base which is extremely supportive of Israel. So there's a basis for this reality out there. But there's the beginning of a change among younger Americans. They are leading our entire society towards a future that is slowly growing more diverse, slowly growing more tolerant. You might not be able to see that in a Donald Trump rally, but that's the demographic truth. And it is slowly growing more open-minded, which is not the captive of the lies of the mainstream media, which has access to all the facts. Here's the Israeli narrative, and here's the Palestinian narrative, and here's other narratives. As more of the terrible kinds of realities that we heard about from our first two speakers get into the public sphere through the alternative media, and because the kids know better than their elders, support for what Israel does in terms of the colonization of Palestine, in terms of the repression of the Palestinian people, must ebb, and change will eventually be possible, even in the United States. Thank you very much.
Given the hour, I'm going to hold back on
Getting feedback.
any questions. Thank you. We sit too close together sometimes. That I have, and invite questions from the audience. I'm going to turn this off. Those of you who are recording it, do you have a mic that you want the questioners to use, or how do you want to handle that? You want to come up?
I spent a large part of my career with the nonpartisan research staff of the state legislature. And I watched partisan staffers deal, a legislator would go to a partisan staffer and say, what position should I take on some political issue? And I watched partisan staffers I have to evaluate what would work for that legislator, what would work for his leadership, what would work for his constituents, what would work for the people who fund his campaign. Writing a position paper is not a normative issue. I have lunch once a month with a very right-wing Jewish guy, and we've been doing this for years. And one time he said, "How would you solve this problem?" And that threw me right back into being a legislative staffer. And, you know, what would I recommend to a legislative decision maker with respect to this? And I had to acknowledge to him that I wouldn't have recommended much more than what Obama had been doing. You know, you're dealing with political realities that you just can't wish away because it's normatively offensive. So how would you actually deal with the problem?
That's right.
Given that we have these two revered guests here with us, I would try to steer our questions a little bit in the direction of drawing them out some more. It's just such a gift to have them here with us, and so I don't know that Rashid has the answer to how to solve the Middle East situation. If he did, I'm sure he would have shared it with someone by now. But in particular, I think we'd love to hear about the human rights activists who have come to us from the region. So, yes, ma'am. And if you could make your question a question, even if you falsely raise your voice at the end of the sentence, that would be terrific too. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering if you could comment, if in the West Bank at least, aside from the stabbings that we hear about, which you attribute to youthful anger, if there is any organized movement of resistance, maybe more analogous to the first Intifada, engaging large numbers of people in any planned sort of action or resistance?
You want to take several
You want to take a
questions?
couple? Nithya,
Yeah,
please stand up.
sure. I want to just pick up on Dr. Khalidi's point about the role of the PA itself. And I think when you rightfully spoke about Israel and settler colonialism, but I think it's very difficult for us to talk about Palestine now without speaking about the political role of the PA itself, especially in light of the security coordination with Israel and the repression of social movements, of workers' movements. So I would like to just get your thoughts on how is the situation at the moment, and what you think is the significance of the teachers' movement, for example, or also the current campaigns that are happening against the laws that are being passed against workers in Palestine.
Couldn't hear that.
They'll respond to it in a way that will make it obvious. Or one more here, please.
Yeah, I just have the question
Stand up, please. I think
directed
both of
at
you.
both Raji Sourani and Shawan. I have tremendous respect for the work that both your organizations have done and the sacrifices that you two have made. And I realize that I'm speaking from a position of privilege, but I was wondering what you thought of what Arundhati Roy has called the NGO-ization of resistance, that channeling of the struggles against colonialism and to some extent against capitalism into the human rights discourse, and what you think is the effect of that.
Why don't you begin an answer to those three questions, and then we'll perhaps gather some more.
You go.
You know, I'll go to your question.
Is your mic on?
Supposedly I switch it.
Or perhaps you just need it closer to your...
No, he turned it off. I'm going to turn mine on.
It's up.
It's all.
We, the Palestinians, we know what we want. Exactly. PLO Charter 65 was in a clear-cut way talking about one secular democratic state for Muslim, Christians, and Jews. In 74, Bruno Kreisky, Wolf Palme of Sweden, met with President Arafat, and they said to him, this means a call for destruction for the state of Israel, and this is not acceptable. And you have to fix it. He said, what do you mean? They committed themselves to invest their best and to conclude the result of giving a Palestinian state in Gaza, including Jerusalem, with the right of return, if Palestinians recognize Israel and say we want to stay with them. Gaza, including Jerusalem, and that means historical compromise for 79% of historical Palestine. 74, President Arafat stated that in a clear-cut way in the UN, not in the street, not in the press, not in the media. Later on, Wolf Palme assassinated, and the Austrian Chancellor died, and nothing really has been achieved. Now, we agreed upon Oslo, Palestinian state will be concluding Gaza West Bank, including Jerusalem, and also Accords. But the one who signed that with them, both parties, whether the Israeli Rabin or the Palestinian Arafat, both has been killed by the Israelis. Now, you hear something, very strange and unique now. They want a Jewish state. A Jewish state where? In 1967 borders. But what about the Palestinians there? They want the purity of the Jewish state. And that means, like they want a state like Vatican or Iran. They want fundamental Jewish state. We are in the 21st century, and we are talking about the oasis of democracy in the Middle East, talking with this rhetoric. It's out of time and space. And very unfortunately, everybody talk about Muslim fundamentalism, but nobody talking about Jewish fundamentalism. Nobody. Now, we are happy with one-state solution and to be second-degree citizen. But if we say that, they will accuse us of calling for the destruction of that Jewish state. And de facto, what is His Excellency Netanyahu doing on the ground? Having this. By the fait accompli policy, which they are imposing on the ground day after day, in Jerusalem, in the West Bank, they are ruling out any option for an independent Palestinian viable state. They have to tell us what we want, what they want. One-state solution is fine with us, and two-state solution is fine for us. They are very confused, they are losing balance and direction, and that's for us very, very helpful. Hopefully, they will conclude what they know. Now, regarding NGOs and what we are, whether we are doing political or not political, I think if we want to do politics, we will say we are doing politics. Mixing politics with the human rights, that's very critical. Of course, we do have, in the personal level, our very solid political views. We have been in politics, we have been in prison, but the minute you really be in human rights, you have to act according to very simple formula. Facts, standards, conclusions. The Palestinian human rights organizations gained their credibility, professionalism, independence, especially after Oslo Accords. In 1994, we concluded very simple, straightforward formula. We said we will keep working on the occupation agenda without any change to the Palestinian state being achieved. At the same time, we said that we will work on the Palestinian Authority agenda, awareing about its limitation, area of jurisdiction, no sovereignty, but we will seize this unique opportunity for a state in a process and try to apply rule of law, democracy, and human rights so we can have real democracy in the Middle East, and we can set a precedent. We can be unique. We have the entire counter-education of suppression, oppression, which we deeply, suppressed off by this belligerent occupation. Now, we acted on the PA as if Israel occupation doesn't exist, and we worked on the Israeli occupation as PA doesn't exist. And we showed very serious professionalism and independence when Palestinian human rights activists were the first to be imprisoned by our president. Arafat, in the early days of Oslo Accords, whether Dr. Iyad al-Sarraj, myself, and others, when we criticized in a clear-cut way torture in custody, restriction of freedom of expression and assembly, when we criticized the formation of the state security courts at the time, which was welcomed by Vice President Al Gore when he was visiting, and which was welcomed by the Israelis. All the way long, we kept this in a clear-cut way, not because we try to be politically correct and balanced. We know our fate, destiny, lies in the respect of rule of law, democracy, and human rights. In the war, which I was describing about in summer 2014, Hamas, or the resistance, took 22 suspected collaborators and they assassinated them. They shot them after killing of 3 of the resistance movement leaders at this war. 5 hours later, this was on the record, and we issued a press statement. We condemned and considered this extrajudicial killing, and we said this is wrong, and they should be carried in the court of law. Do you know what does that mean, saying that in Gaza at that time, when the blood and the corpse and the destruction with the collaborators' cooperation with this criminal Israeli occupation, even my wife didn't digest that. Even my daughter didn't digest that, and they criticized me. But we know our mission and our commitment. So I think we are not politicizing. You are talking about romantic revolutionaries who believe in the power of idea, who believe in justice for victims, who wants rule of law, democracy, and human rights. We are not selective. We cannot be schizophrenic. And that's what is needed at that part of the world.
Regarding participation of the people in peaceful demonstration and things like that, there is, let me say, beginning of movements here, there, and the Israeli, they shoot on them, and they killed some of them. But no one has a recipe how to get that work on. But what I know 400% that the situation and the environment there is very, very difficult. You don't know which direction will take. the next round or the round already is in the place. Many people these days, they are speaking about resistance, different ways, wars. That's the case. The Israeli shooting and shot to kill, this is a policy these days. You don't know sometimes what will happen. For instance, in Egypt, no one knows what will happen, even before, in Tunisia, and also in Palestine. But we know that the Israeli produce the resistance themselves. Which type of form, I don't know, to be honest. We are with the peaceful ways. For instance, to go to the ICC, the International Criminal Court. This gives the people some hope. But now we are facing difficulties, when it comes to the Security Council, for instance, to have like a resolution against settlements, the veto. This veto and these actions, it means that close the door before Palestinians to use peaceful ways of resistance, let me say, or asking for their rights. This is a big problem for the future and for now. Another thing is, I don't want to go in politics. In law, purely law, speaking law, PA is a subcontractor. Law. But we try not to say that. That's the case. To avoid saying that, it's hard sometimes. Speaking purely, yes, that's the case. They are responsible. But to be honest with you, President Abbas himself, look, we have no real ministers, we have no real government. What we have, I don't know how to describe it. When the president himself showed the Palestinians on the TV, just a few months ago on the TV, show us his permit. And the Israeli wrote in his permit, and he said that, I'll show it on the TV, said, even with a security reasons, we allow him to move for 2 months. With the security. He is not, they have restrictions on his movement, but they left that for 2 months. This is what he shows the Palestinians. This is the president, called the president. And here you can imagine which authority that we have, which sovereignty we have. I think they want a toy. This is what they want, the Israelis, the Americans. They want a toy called PA, called government, called ministers, but in reality, they have nothing. They're paralyzed. The Israelis, they closed, before them the checkpoints, and they don't let them to go here or there. And many times they threaten them that we will withdraw, your privileges, like VIP. And the Palestinians, they make jokes on VIP. VIP in English, they very important person. The Palestinian people, the public, they change it. Very Israeli person. This is the case. I'm not joking, that's the case. Here, just you can imagine what we have. Okay, we try to build on that. I'm sure that they used to have, let me say, a good faith. But the Israelis trapped them. They didn't help them. Mahmoud Abbas, the president, gave everything, and he got nothing. And that's the case. Now, the direction they are taking is international law, UN, ICC, things like that, and we are pushing for that. But if the Americans close the door and the Europeans close the door, what exactly they want? That's, the issue. And regarding, the workers and the PA and all of these things, our society these days is shaking, unfortunately. And we are in transitional time. In all levels, to be honest with you. And we try to use, the international law and the Palestinian accession to the human rights treaties to push for that. If you ask me if we have space and opportunity for that or not, I can say yes. We raise our voice loudly. If you follow, for instance, the civil society organizations these days and their interventions, their calls, their voice, you can see that and you can get it. That it's clear. We are now in the front lines defending the rights, doing everything, and I can't say that they are fully ugly and bad. No. Now, we have a discussion with them. They are ready to accept these things, but at the end, they have no authority also in their hands. They try to practice their authority on us. That's the case, but the Palestinian civil society is strong enough, and we are lucky in that. This is, I think, what to protect things. But also in the same time, we are with the participation and representation. We call for participation for all Palestinian people to select their representatives and to maintain the Palestinian representation, not on the level of PLC, the level of PNC. By doing that, you integrate the new generation to exercise their right of the participation, and this is one way, and also to maintain the representation of Palestinians because it's expired. And this is a very important way. Thank you.
We have the ethical culture people who I understand get less ethical the longer we overstay our welcome here, and we don't want that. So let me have you're very eager, one last question, and then we'll invite answers from our panel.
My question is for Raji. As a Gazan-based human rights activist, I'd like to get your perspective on the headway that ISIS is making in Gaza, and whether that actually might make Israel less enthusiastic or avid to go after Hamas.
It's a big question.
Huh.
It's very, very important, your question. I think I'm grateful for you that you raised it. If you disconnect people, 2 million people, from the outside world, if you restrict the movement of goods and individuals, nothing come in or out, if you make this level of poverty, unemployment, if you make this level of suppression, oppression, if you make people, suffer 3 wars in 6 years, massive destruction for houses, fear, uncertainty, no future, no hope, you have nothing really to lose. You practice and convey simple message. You will have the rule of jungle. You are living that on your skin. Then what is the hardest of that? People will give up and they say, there is no justice in this part of the world. The whole world seeing us, witnessing us, knowing what's happening with us, and they are just doing nothing. This is exactly why Daesh existed. I mean, they want the rule of jungle. That's why we hate, Bin Laden. That's why we hate, all those who practice, this kind of crimes. You are pushing people in one-way ticket to the rule of jungle. For me, it's a miracle that we don't have Daesh control in Gaza. Chapeau for Hamas. Really, I mean, I'm very grateful for them. I'm grateful for the Palestinian people, really, who has this level of super morality and not really to indulge and resort to the rule of jungle. A few months ago, back almost 1 year, and I'm talking about March, April 2015, we began to witness in Gaza some incidents, accidents here and there. Even some rockets launched against Israel. And security discovered, and thanks God for discovering before, 3 cars booby-trapped in order to execute within Gaza population. There was even attempt to assassinate Haniya by Daesh, the Prime Minister at the time. Now, this it triggered really something. I mean, you know, within Hamas, and they became alerted, and they knew, I mean, they crossed any red lines, and that's why at the time there was massive roundup for suspects of being Daesh, etc. And even if you are familiar with Gaza, you will be shocked to see cement barriers, you know, around security areas or governmental areas, etc. This lasted between March, April, and October 2015. During this period, I think they put this phenomena under control, and they figured out exactly what size, I mean, they are talking about, and they managed to, you know, keep it under control. And there is some inside the prison still, I mean, till this period. So I would say there is maybe individuals, there may be tens of people, it doesn't exceed that. And I don't think there is anyone has guaranteed now or in the future that, you know, ISIS, Daesh want to flourish once and again. And this is, I mean, the question on imposing, for example, to United States. I mean, you are fighting all these extremist groups, fundamental groups in the area. You are bombing, looking after, supporting, etc. What about Gaza? You want to manufacture it with allowing Israel to impose what the ICRC, the Red Cross, says. This is illegal, inhuman, collective punishment for Palestinian civilians, and they should be lifted immediately, imminently. This is persecution. This is a crime against humanity. Stop it. No single human rights organization across the globe doesn't say that. There is all civil society, the creme de la creme of civil society across the globe took the boats, rescued their life, and they went to Gaza shores. They were bombed, killed, or arrested, or humiliated by the Israelis, and the siege lasting 10 years. Do US want ISIS in Gaza? Even not for our own interest, even for US interest, for the Israeli interest. But Israel wants that to have more excuse to kill and destroy and to commit more crimes.
Well, thank you so much. We do have to close because we need to give the space back. I want to thank the Center for Constitutional Rights for sponsoring this event. I want to thank our amazing guests, Raji and Shawan, for joining us here tonight. And I want to thank and acknowledge the Lenape people. We are on occupied Lenape land here in Manhattan. And to the extent that we are people, I think, who care about the dispossession of Native peoples, forcibly and violently, I want to, when I can, acknowledge that this is their land and we are occupying it. Thanks so much for coming.
It's always lying.